Hello, if you're new here, I'm Tortor and I'm a stop motion animator. On this channel you can expect to see tutorials of all sorts relating to stop motion animation. There'll be some claymation, some paper cutout and all sorts of things in between. In today's tutorial I'm using claymation and I'm using a clay that I absolutely love called Nuplast. It's made by a company called New Clay. You can find them at the web address on screen, and for this particular tutorial I'll be using this fluorescent multicolour pack. My particular interest is in this pink fluorescent colour on the side, because for this tutorial today I'm going to be theming everything on pigs. It's the Chinese New Year of the pig on the 5th of February, and so I'm going to be using this lovely bright fluorescent pink to make myself a pig and lots of piglets. I thought it'd be a fun thing to do, so I came up with an idea where a pig jumps in the air and as it falls to the ground it becomes lots of little piglets. So first of all I'm going to be sculpting a ball bounce sequence. So I'm making different shaped pink balls, some that are squashed, some that are round and some that are stretched, because to begin this animation I'm going to have a little ball that leaves the ground, goes up in the air, becomes the pig, and then the pig obviously hits the ground, becomes piglets. So the easiest way to do a ball bounce in claymation is with a replacement sequence, and I am doing that here, making these different shapes so that for ease of animation I just replace them out each frame. Now I'm cutting off another strip. I've got a little tool here, you can pick these up from craft shops, they're really cheap, and I'm going to give you a little trick. If you don't have a weighing scales to get equal sized pieces of plasticine, use a cutting mat, and you see the lines that are on the cutting mat, you can use those as a guide to get equal pieces. So I'm using 2 lines per bit, and I'm going to chop this stick of pink clay into 10 equal sized pieces using those lines, and then these pieces are going to become my piglets. So I know that each piglet is going to be roughly the same size. I think this is quite a good trick. You could also use a ruler if you don't have a cutting mat, but it just helps you to get equally sized pieces and you don't need any fancy weighing scales. So now I'm working out how I'm going to create a piglet. So I'm going to take one piece of this clay and I'm going to soften that up in my hands. With all types of plasticine it's good to roll it around in your hands for a bit and get it nice and warm and supple so that you can sculpt it. And then I'm just pulling off pieces of different sizes and making the body first, then the head, and then I'm going to want to make the legs, and for the legs I'm going to roll out a sausage, a very thin little sausage, and again using the cutting mat I've got a piece here that is 2 squares long. I'm going to cut that equally down the middle in half, and then I'll cut those halves in half again to create 4 equally fat piglet legs to attach to my body. I don't believe I've ever sculpted a piglet before. I just kind of did this intuitively, but it wasn't particularly hard. If you want to make a little piglet, just a round piece for the body, these little tubes for the legs, another round piece that's a bit smaller for the head, and then obviously I used a little extra bit of that strip that I was making the legs from to create a little snout, and then I just curled a tiny little slither to make a tail. Now the thing that was missing that really makes the piglet come alive are actually the ears, which I made triangular pieces of clay and I just folded them over, a bit like Jack Russell ears, kind of. This was a little bit themed on my dog. And then I made these little triangular ears, and you can see here they look quite cute, and this kind of really brought the pig alive. Everything was attached by smoothing with the pin. Like I said before, I say this many times, a pin is an incredibly useful tool for sculpting. I then used the pin as well to make eyes and snout holes. So the next thing was I now had my one master piglet, which I'm basing all my subsequent piglets on. Now it was time to make those other piglets, so I started making a piglet production line. I separated each of those little pieces of clay that we cut earlier into bits and then made their bodies, their heads, their legs, and then started assembling each piglet one by one. Now I soon found that these piglets were taking quite a long time to make. Originally the plan was to make 10 piglets, but I decided to lessen that number down to 7. I feel like it's always good to have an odd number of things, and I felt like 7 was enough. 10 was too many, it was just taking me too long, and instead I used the extra balls and piglet bits to make partial piglets. So I didn't add all the detail to them, but I thought I might be able to use them as a in between if I needed them. So that's what I did with the extra piglet bits. You can see here I've got a little group of piglets already. Very, very cute. Yeah, they are quite fiddly. Each piglet was about the size of my thumbnail, so they're pretty tiny. You have to have quite a bit of patience and some really delicate hands to get these done. Now, I was all ready to start the animation. I've got my wire, I have got my wire cutters, some white plasticine in case I need that for holding up rigs, and then I have just jotted down a rough sequence of how I thought the animation would play out, what shapes I want to replace out, and roughly how many frames I think each part of the animation is going to last. This is just a guide for me. It's almost like a dope sheet. If you don't know what one of those are, they're also called exposure sheets, and it's kind of the thing that you see at the side of Dragon Frame. If you're using that on the right hand side here, you can add in information to remind you of what you need to move or what needs to change in each frame. Now, as usual with every animation I do, I take a few frames of the blank scene to begin with. This is so that I have a clean plate for editing out the rigs, which there'll be a lot of that in this animation, and also just because I like to have it as a handle in case I want to start the animation on a plain environment, which is what I do in this case. So now that I'm in Dragon Frame, I've got my first shape in the frame. I'm putting guides in to make sure that everything stays in place. I've got some red vertical lines to keep everything in the center, and then I've put a green line across horizontally to make sure everything is in the plane of focus. And I've punched in as well to make sure that the focus is definitely sharp, because you don't want to do it all and realize that everything's soft. So the first part of this animation, as I was saying before, is to do a ball bounce. So I'm switching out my pink ball shapes to make a bounce. It starts off squashed on the floor, and the shapes become stretched as they're going up to show the acceleration. You can see that the rig that I've used here is a little bit of white plasticine at the bottom, and then a piece of very stiff wire to hold the shape above. I felt like this was the best rig setup for this animation. It does take a bit of patience because things aren't as stable as they could be, so you just have to wiggle it and make sure that it is steady before you leave the frame, otherwise it will fall over, just like this one did here. But I also want to point out I used white plasticine. This is in a white environment, and I felt like by using white plasticine as my rig, it would minimize any color that's cast onto the white paper that I'm using, because when you erase a rig out, you don't want there to be color in the shadows that you need to erase out as well, because that will kind of ruin the illusion. So if you're using plasticine for rigs, probably best to think about that as well. Make sure that the color of the plasticine isn't casting an unwanted shadow. You can see the paper that I've used here actually for my environment. It's just a big sheet of white card, and I have stuck that with blue tack to my table and then to the bar at the back of my table. And this curved shape where it sweeps up like that is called an infinity wall, and often in animation studios they'll have these. They'll be made out of wood and they're often painted, and this kind of gives you that very smooth environment. You don't see any line or crease from where a piece of paper at the back is joining a table. It's very smooth, and it's used a lot in photography and film and everything. It's a common known thing. But the cheapest way, if you're just doing animation at home, is a nice big piece of paper or a big piece of card, and just make sure that it is stuck down carefully with blue tack. The other thing to note when you are using card is that plasticine will leave a bit of an oily residue, so you're probably going to have to be replacing that card for each animation, because otherwise there will be these little smudgy marks left on it. So the ball bounce is at its highest point now, and this ball is going to become a pig, like I was saying, so I want there to be a little bit of a kind of wobble at the top, and I'm going to use an air pump sound, like as if you're pumping up a tire. So it's kind of like blowing up a balloon, and there's a little bit of a squish, squash, stretchy thing. So basically I'm using all the same shapes that I used in my ball bounce, but I'm alternating, so it's squashing outwards to the sides like you can see right now, and then it will go back to a ball shape, and then it will squash the other way upwards. So it will pull out horizontally, go back to a ball, pull up vertically, go back to a ball, pull out horizontally. So it kind of gives a kind of wibbly wobbly ball shape in the middle of the air. And I try and get each frame to sit slightly higher than the previous frame, so it still looks as if it's travelling up in the air very, very slightly. Now the pig is just about to become a pig. So I'm now going to make that perfectly round ball grow in size, and then it is going to pop legs, a head, tail and snout. Now to do this, I am actually using the pig's snout, which is essentially a short leg, because I used the same width of clay to create that. And where a leg is going to pop out, I'm putting the short stumpy bit first, and then the next frame will have the full length leg, and then the next leg to pop will be a short one, and then it will get longer. And also, to attach the legs, to make sure that they stay, you don't want a leg to fall off or even the head to fall off, I use the same stiff wire that I'm using for the rig. I cut a new piece, I inserted that up the leg and into the body, and then pushed it on tightly to hold the legs and the head and everything in place. So you can see now, as these legs are popping on, I'm also turning the body of the pig. So the pig is kind of turning away from camera. I've slightly altered the shape of the body. It's become less round. It's more of an oblong shape now. And then I'm adding the snout and the tail, and finally the ears as well. Now, because this pig is in the air and gravity, the ears want to be kind of flapping outwards as if they're hanging down below the pig. So that is why they're in this strange position. But also, when the pig hits the floor, I want to squash the legs, make them a bit more short and stumpy to kind of show a bit of a bounce, and then pull those ears down so they kind of flap down, and then when the pig bounces, the ears will flap back up. The same with the tail, actually. So you just want to be aware when things are moving, you're not just moving an object. This object has life in it. It has personality, and it also, you have to think about the physics, the reaction. So if something was to land and it's got flappy ears, those ears are going to have a reaction to that impact as well. So you have to really think about not just the main body that's moving, but all the other bits of that character or creature that are going to move as well. I think when you're learning animation, this can be an easy thing to forget. You tend to just want to move your thing, and you don't really think about secondary movements, but the secondary movements are what makes your animation go up a level. Now, when my pig has bounced, it's going to land on its back again, and I want that pig to divide into piglets, and this is going to happen quite quickly. What I've done is I have come back in with that tool I was using earlier to cut the clay, and I have just kind of cut in a cross shape on the side of the pig as an in-between, and then that pig is gonna straight away become these little piglets. Now, on the first day of animation, I did these in-betweens. I wanted all these piglets to bounce, and so this is what you're seeing now, what I started trying to do on day one. It didn't work. The piglets were far too delicate. Trying to rig them all and the rig removal, it was going to be insane. It just really wasn't worth the time and effort to try and do that. So I ended up giving up on this idea. I realised it wasn't going to work, and it was quite late at this point. It was about 9 p.m. and I was really, really tired. So I stopped, and then I picked up again on day 2. I decided on something different. I decided the piglets would run out of frame from the point, so as soon as they become piglets, they start trotting out of the frame. And just to extend that animation slightly, one piglet would remain for a little bit and do a little wiggle and almost say hello to the camera. So, to continue the animation on the second day, I got the same drag and frame window open, and I looked at the last frame that I'd taken where I needed the piglets to be, and I draw an oval to show that all the piglets needed to be within this oval to continue on and look seamless with what I had shot the day before. So I've put this little oval here, and then you can see I'm on the live view now, and now I need to make sure that all of the little piglets are inside this oval, and that's going to ensure that the animation continues and it looks seamless, like I said. The nice thing about drag and frame, if you have the luxury of owning that, is that you have all these options for guides that you can put up, and it is really helpful to make sure that your animation is doing what you want. The next part of the process, when I had got all the piglets in place, was to obviously have them all leave the frame, and I wanted them all moving out of the frame from different positions. I wanted it to look like they're spreading in all different directions. So I gave them each a path, again using the guide tools. I just used straight line in a different colour, and each piglet is on a separate line. This was so that I didn't lose track of which direction they were going in, and to make them trot out, I just did a very simple wiggle. So one frame they are turning toward the left, and then the next frame that particular piglet would turn towards the right, so they kind of wiggle out. And because it's moving quite quite fast, this kind of gave quite a nice trotting effect. And again, if you're moving something very delicate like a little piglet that you've sculptured, try and hold the central part of the piglet. Don't touch the bits that you don't need to touch, like the ears and the tail, because they are really, really delicate and it's easy to knock one off, and then that will delay you because you've got to like reattach it and stuff. And the final part of this animation, just to finish things off, the piglet in the foreground, I started pulling focus on that piglet, so I turned the focus ring incrementally frame by frame. This is something that you can get gadgets to do this for you. They're not something I have the luxury to have, so I just have to feel for the amount that I'm turning that focus ring, and you know, just gradually start turning it a bit more, so it kind of eases into the focus pull, and then you are left with the focus being sharp on that pig in the foreground, because I thought it'd be really nice to just have this pig look to camera, do a little wiggle, tilt its head, flap its ears, and then leave the frame, just to finish things off, and also so that the viewer gets to see the piglet in a little bit more detail, because it took me a very long time to sculpt them and they all vacate quite quickly. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. The rig removal was the same as I always do. I use Photoshop, I have my clean plate, and I just erase out the rigs frame by frame. If you want to see how to do rig removal, you can refer to one of my previous tutorials. The one I did last week with the fire will have that in, and there's also one I did way back last year with a pumpkin and how to remove rigs. It's the same every time, so I don't want to repeat that for people that already know how to do it. If you like this tutorial, please do give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you try animating a pig yourself for Chinese New Year, do link me up on social media because I would love to see it. I have a Patreon page now if you would like to support me. Every little helps. And I'm trying to put a tutorial out every week on this channel, so you've got that to look forward to. I forgot to mention actually, I do have another YouTube channel where I'm documenting what I'm doing with my animation at the moment as well. So there will be more behind the scenes stuff there on this particular tutorial. If you're interested in that, links to that can be found in the description box, along with links to the Patreon and anything else you might be looking for. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'll catch you again in the next tutorial.